The top business stories live from the Sky newsroom. Shipments of British-made cars and jet engines set sail for the US as the UK-US trade deal takes effect. The financial regulator introduces new rules to help savers get better returns in one of the biggest changes to investment advice for a decade. Plus, how the rise of AI is exacerbating Britain's workplace skills gap. Good morning, this is Business Live with me, Paul Kelso. Now, British-made cars and jet engines heading for the US this morning do so with the benefit of the lowest tariffs of any trading nation after the UK-US trade deal took effect at 5 a.m. this morning. The deal, which sees cars facing 10% tariffs and aerospace parts no import taxes at all, is thus far the only one agreed by the US administration. It still doesn't include promised zero tariffs for steel and aluminium exports. It comes as Canada scrapped its digital services tax on US tech companies overnight to try and restart its trade negotiations with Donald Trump, who's described the 3% levy as a direct and blatant attack on American business. Now, let's talk to Matthew Orisman, who's a managing partner at Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman, who joins me now live from central London. Matthew, you've been involved in doing these kind of trade deals. Let's start with the fact this US-UK deal, long trumpeted by the government here particularly, it begins this morning. It does put, doesn't it, the UK in an advantageous position against its competitors, although the situation is still worse than it was in the spring.
Yes. Good morning, and thank you for having me. Yes, exactly right. The UK is in a much better position than any of its competitors, especially the European Union, especially when looking at auto tariffs. But still 10% more than Europe was, or than the UK was getting taxed previously to the Trump administration coming in. So it's a good start. I think the Starmer government should be commended for getting itself into a much safer place than everybody else, and to getting a path forward on better deals and more concessions. But it's still worse off than it was this time last year.
In terms of the seriousness of the threat to the UK car industry, that was at the heart of the Prime Minister pushing hard on the US to get this deal over the line. Job cuts feared. Just give us an idea of how important the US is as an export market for the UK.
It's major. I think the UK, it's the number one export market for the UK. The UK exports about 100,000 cars a year to the US, especially high-end vehicles that do employ a huge population here in the UK. The 10% is an interesting rate for the UK because it does obviously increase the cost to those, but it was high-end consumers in the US, so hopefully it won't impact the market too much. What I find particularly interesting is that 10% is capped at 100,000 cars, which does mean there'll be limited growth of the US as a UK market. So if the UK exporters do have an opportunity to sell more cars to the US, those anything above 100,000 will be taxed at a higher rate. Hopefully that'll come down over time with negotiation, but it is a space to watch because the UK would love to, I'm sure, export more cars to the US as well.
We've talked a lot about cars, particularly in the context of this deal, a bit less about aerospace. £35 billion worth of turnover in the UK, 70% of the aerospace market is exports. Just how important is this? It's effectively a zero tariff rate for aerospace particularly, and I wonder how much of it is linked to defence and the increase in spending that the US wants to see across Europe.
Well, I look at it in two ways. It's definitely important. There's some great aviation makers here in the UK that should have enjoyed the export of their goods to the US. However, most of those engines, or at least a good amount of them, are going to be round trip back here as part of the purchase that British Airways is doing of Boeing planes. So I think you have to look at those two deals in context, so that those engines, yes, are going out at 0%, but they're coming back here attached to Boeing planes, and BA has put in a multi-billion-dollar order for those planes. So it's a nice. It looks like a good win. I don't think economically it's going to be a huge difference and a huge concession. But I think on the point you're making around getting Rolls-Royce engines and other engines into U.S. defense space, again, is an area where the U.K. is going to be spending more, is also a positive. So these are somewhat wins, but I don't bank them the same way as I would say the auto, because a lot of those end products are going to be consumed and bought back here in the UK.
Finally, let's just talk about what's not yet in this deal. Steel and aluminium, zero tariffs, according to the very brief summary of this document, not yet delivered. Negotiations ongoing. Part of it, as I understand it, about the fact that one of the biggest British steel suppliers is owned by Tata Steel, imports much of its raw material. Do you think this will get over the line, or is this going to get stuck in the US concerns about backdooring, as it were, non-UK products being passed off as British?
That seems to be one of the key sticking points, but it's also tied to China. The U.S. is still looking for the U.K. to make various concessions and commitments around trade with China in the form of export controls, investment controls, and outbound investment controls. Those are still under negotiations. And somewhat are being held hostage to the fact that the U.S. is engaged in its own negotiations with China. So the U.S. is also looking to see what commitments the U.K. is going to make around China. And I think once that's set, we'll be able to see the steel issue become more unlocked. So yes, there's the backdoor issue, associated with Tata and others, but more fundamentally, this is the last piece that needs to be solved on the trade side, but that is being bottlenecked because of the discussion on UK controls when it relates to China.
Matthew Orisman, thank you very much for your time this morning. We'll get more on this trade deal now with Chris Southworth, the Secretary-General of the International Chamber of Commerce. We've touched on this, but very quickly, your view, Chris, to start with on the benefits of this deal to the UK. It's a narrow trade deal, but it does mean products can move at a better rate than certainly European competitors, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not really a trade deal. I mean, this is a tariff de-escalation agreement, if you like. It's good news for cars, good news for aerospace, potentially good news for UK steel, and that's important. There's hundreds of thousands of jobs in the UK, so that's all good. But I mean, overall, we're still worse off than we were in April, Liberation Day, and there's all sorts of question marks still hanging around. None of this is legally binding, for one, so this is a lot of legal uncertainty. And don't forget, tariffs grab the headlines, but it's uncertainty that does the damage, and there's no certainty in the current environment. And then we've still got question marks over 100% tariffs on film, which is one of our fastest growing sectors, pharmaceuticals as well. No clarity on the digital trade agreement, where there was a commitment at the last round of negotiations. And so there's a lot to play for. This is a good step forward, but it's not a trade deal as such. It's more of a de-escalation of tariffs. And even then, we're still no better off. In fact, we're worse off than we were before April. So you've got to see things in context.
Yeah, and you represent the International Chambers of Commerce. How much of a chill is being cast by the fact that you talk about the uncertainties that remain in the UK deal as far as it goes? July the 9th is the deadline for the tariffs globally that have been paused. Still not been any other bilateral deals with the US. Is this uncertainty showing up in trade and business around the world amongst your members?
Oh, 100%. I've just come back from the Commonwealth Trade Ministers meeting in Namibia. And the WTO, World Trade Organization, last week. So in the last 2 weeks, we've been speaking to a whole range of 60, 70, 80 countries and governments. And, the world's moved on, let's be frank. Actually, what the rest of the world is saying is we need to stabilize the system. We need the rules-based system to continue. And we need to work together outside of the US and manage that relationship with the US, which is highly unpredictable. But the rest of the world is moving on for sure. That's good news for business in terms of the global system stabilizing somewhat. And we should be reassured that ministers around the world are very focused on keeping trade flowing, which is good. But for the UK, we are particularly exposed to the US. Both of us have £1 trillion dollars invested in each other, 1 million jobs, both sides. So we are particularly exposed, and obviously our relationship is very close with the US, and we want to maintain that. But this is a good opportunity to now shift focus and spread our risk somewhat to the rest of the world. And to some degree, you saw that in the trade strategy that was launched last week, which is much more balanced. Obviously a focus on the US, but also the EU, but also China and the rest of the world. And that's good news. We need to have a balanced, pragmatic focus. By the way, in the World Trade Organization last week, we were told pretty loudly and clearly that the UK is really seen now as a go-to country in terms of being a pragmatic champion on solutions, very much a go-to in terms of bridging with the emerging economies, a trusted ally of the emerging economies. And that puts the UK in a really good place to start to really negotiate and be a bridge between all of these countries overall, and that's good news for UK trade.
So there's clearly some positives there as you see it. We've talked about trade and goods in the context of tariffs, but Donald Trump has jumbled up taxation policy along with tariffs with a couple of lines around digital services tax. Canada overnight pulled its digital services tax, seen essentially as a levy on big US-owned tech companies to get trade talks going again. Just emerged this morning, Reuters reporting the EU is saying it is not negotiating, not putting its Digital Markets Act up for negotiation. How much does that muddy the waters here, trying to do business with the US when the conversation about trade is pulling in all kinds of other areas, particularly around taxation, that many people would say are not unfair competitive advantages in the way the president sees them?
Well, the EU have much more market power than the UK, but I mean, overall, the big picture is there's an over-reliance on US tech. Tax is not a tariff, it's two quite different things, so you can't confuse those two things. You know, but the digital services taxes on US companies, if we're going to put it that way, is really a sort of direction of travel, if you like, in terms of getting stronger arms around the tech sector and in terms of their impact on society, their impact on the tax revenue all over the world. It's not just the UK or EU. This is a massive issue overall. But we just have to balance those priorities and be pragmatic and negotiate with the US. But there's a huge imbalance in our focus on US tech firms at the moment, and lots of opportunities for domestic tech firms to grow as well. So it's just about enabling our own companies to grow, but also working with the US tech firms as well in terms of the role they play in the global system.
Yeah. Chris Southworth, thank you very much for that this morning.
Thank you.
Now, in other news, hundreds of jobs are at risk after the owner of the Lindsey oil refinery in Lincolnshire entered into insolvency. Sky News' Mark Kleiman has learnt that State Oil, the parent company of Prax Group, which has oil field interests in the Shetlands and owns roughly 200 petrol stations, has been forced to call in administrators amid mounting losses at the refinery. Unite, the union, has called on the government to intervene to protect the oil refinery after Sky News revealed the plan, saying it believes the administration is a direct result of the government's failure. Now, if you scan the QR code on your screen now, you can read more on that and many other stories on our excellent Money blog. Now, economic optimism is at a 10-month high, according to an economic survey published by Lloyds Bank this morning. Business confidence saw a small rise in June, as well as an increase in hiring intentions, with 60% of firms expecting higher staff levels in the coming year. Let's speak to Han Ju Ho, senior economist at Lloyds Bank Commercial Banking. Morning to you. Every conversation I have with a British business at the moment talks about the negative impact of rising employment costs, concerns that they're going to have to let people go. The labour market is cooling. You're obviously hearing something different.
Yes, good morning. So you're right, firms do face challenges, but I think it's worth noting that our survey focuses on expectations for the year ahead rather than current activity. So it basically provides a forward-looking signal on the economy. So firms are telling us that despite current challenges, they are actually preparing for future growth. and opportunities. And as you say, overall confidence has increased by 1 percentage point to 51% in June, staying above the long-term average and really building on the sharp rebound we saw in May. And as you say, hiring intentions have also picked up.
And what do you think explains the confidence increasing, given that the headwinds have been well rehearsed, but they've seen any large employer has seen a steep increase in its employment costs, not just national insurance rising, but the threshold at which is paid, the minimum wage, which of course affects hospitality and retailers particularly. What do you think explains this view that the year ahead will be more positive than the one behind?
Well, as I say, firms do face challenges. There's no getting away from that. But I think our survey puts things into perspective. There have been instances of sharp falls in confidence in recent years. But in spite of the current challenges, the recent results still do paint a picture of resilience among firms and the focus on growth opportunities ahead. And it's worth noting that our survey is focused more on SMEs, which tend to be more sensitive to financing conditions, which have actually improved over the past couple of months.
Yeah, and Lloyds is a big institution that works in business. If companies are seeking to expand, despite the wider economic circumstances, are you as an institution ready to back that optimism with investment in these companies and talk to them about giving the money they need to expand, or is the institution itself concerned about the broader economic picture?
No, I mean, at Lloyds, everything we do is to support British businesses and the economy. So that is very much our focus.
Thank you very much for those insights. Lloyds survey, more optimistic perhaps than the general tenor of those we speak to elsewhere. Now, millions of British savers will be able to access targeted support to get better returns on their money. The Financial Conduct Authority today unveils one of the biggest shake-ups of investment advice for a decade, saying it would allow companies to make generic suggestions to customers without having to meet all the restrictions involved in providing personalised financial advice. Let's work out what this means with Sarah Pritchard, Deputy Chief Executive of the Financial Conduct Authority. Good morning. Sarah, just help explain to us in layman terms what this means. If I'm a customer of a bank or I've got a pension, what can they do today that they couldn't do on Friday?
Morning. Well, as you say, this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to revolutionise the way that firms can help consumers make decisions about their finances. This new framework, the Targeted Support Framework, will enable firms to help consumers make decisions about their pensions. Maybe they are not saving at the rate that is sufficient for them, help people make decisions about their savings, and also help people make decisions about their investments.
Let's just help with what it means practically. People can already make decisions about their money. This is about the advice they can be given by financial institutions, isn't it?
Absolutely. And so we are dealing here with the situation called the advice gap. We know that less than 1 in 10 people receive regulated financial advice. And we see from our data that around about 1 in 5 people are turning to social media instead for help and guidance. We want firms to be able to better help consumers along the way. Targeted support will enable firms to make suggestions to people, not necessarily based on a situation that is optimised for me as an individual, but based upon common characteristics of groups of people. So based upon my age or other characteristics about myself, firms will be able to prompt consumers to make decisions. Critically, this is about enabling consumers to make informed decisions so that they can navigate their financial lives. We know that the financial advice rules at the moment act as quite a barrier, which is where we really hope that this will solve some of that advice gap that I talked about.
So this might be about saying to someone who's got, fortunately have some savings, but they're sitting in cash rather than when they might be in some kind of investment, that they might want to think about investing. Is that it?
Yeah. Absolutely. Our data shows us that of those that hold over £10,000 of investable assets, 60% of those are holding the majority in cash. Now, we think that people may be better off making decisions for the long term. This will not be right for everybody, but thinking about how to create that greater culture of retail investment. Ultimately, we want consumers
Sorry, Sarah, if I could just briefly, we've got a few seconds here. Just what protections do remain? Because the principle of separating financial advice from financial services, so if it's been given by an institution that might profit from those decisions, will you still protect consumers if banks are giving out duff advice that costs people money in future?
Absolutely. This will remain subject to the Financial Ombudsman Service and to the Financial Compensation Scheme. Critically, this is under the Consumer Duty. So that's our landmark regulation that seeks to protect consumers. This very much sits alongside that in order that consumers are protected.
Lovely. Sarah Pritchard from the FCA, thanks very much for talking us through that this morning. Now, still to come on Business Live. Why the rise of AI could exacerbate the UK's skills gap, costing the economy almost £62 billion a year in lost productivity.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News, get the full story first.
The rise of AI could be widening the UK's skill gap. That's according to new data from an employment firm founded by Ewan Blair. Upskilling platform Multiverse claims the AI skills gap is costing the UK economy almost £62 billion a year in lost productivity, equating to 4.7 hours lost each week. Let's get more from Ewan Blair, founder and chief executive of Multiverse, an upskilling platform for AI and tech adoption. You can explain what that means to us another time. Just explain what this skills gap is. Is AI causing the gap because we don't understand how to work it, or is it taking the jobs away?
Well, look, that is an interesting question in and of itself. I think you've had this explosion of AI tools and the capability of AI tools through large language models. And yet you have a workforce that is not sufficiently equipped to actually make the most out of those tools and the possibilities they offer. So tens of billions has been spent on the kind of application layer around AI by businesses, public sector, organizations up and down the country. And yet less than a quarter of employees are actively using AI tools in their roles, despite the fact that 90% of them want to use them more and want to learn. So you've got this kind of big human enablement gap that can only be filled by skilling people on the job for AI to actually be as effective as it should be.
This gap is being caused by people unable. Is it? I suppose I'm trying to establish, is this savings and benefits and increased productivity they could be accessing if they were using AI correctly, rather than sitting looking at their screens wondering, I can't get this thing to work. Forgive the characterisation.
No, I mean, it's not a ridiculous characterization, because the reality is, to this point, tools are only as effective as the training you give people to use them. So you have, massive opportunities around cost avoidance, cost reduction, revenue generation, customer centricity that aren't being captured, because even, by the way, where we are using AI tools, people are using it as a replacement to a search engine or to prompt answers to fairly basic questions. And you kind of have this faster horses syndrome, where we're not yet doing any of the radical things, building agents, starting to delegate decision-making in key areas, mapping customers, spotting mega trends. There are lots of really great things that AI make incredibly accessible, but only if you're trained to do that.
Are we in a position here where the shop floor, as it were, might know more and be more open and better able to use these tools than the boss class, who are almost inevitably older?
Well, you have that dilemma, though. Funnily enough, I wouldn't say it's an age thing. The fastest adopters of AI among our apprenticeship cohorts are actually over 45s. And so I think it's less of an age thing and more of a risk aversion piece, which is, again, why training is so important. Teach people to use these tools safely and ethically so they can actually get the most out of them and not generate unnecessary risks. We do find the most successful initiatives are led by the CEO empowering their wider organization to actually start to do things and create with AI. So you definitely have some friction. I mean, I shared before, right, that less than a quarter of the workforce are actually using these AI tools. Over 75% are using them in their personal lives. There's a massive delta there.
And a quick one, if I could. There's some data out this morning, a survey showing a sharp reduction in the number of graduate-level jobs that have been advertised since ChatGPT was introduced. We got similar data last week, about a third less. Does that suggest those research jobs, the kind of classic entry-level jobs, are under threat, or do you think it's just about how we use this? Briefly, if you could.
Yeah, so we're seeing a real risk to knowledge workers, and we're focused largely on retraining people who are already in the workforce, that 98.5% of the employee base, to make sure they don't get left behind. But the reality is, AI is unlikely to take your job, but someone with the skills to use AI just might. And so this makes the skills piece an imperative, both at an individual level, but also at a company
I'm going to have to
organization.
leave it there. That's it from me for the moment. Thank you to you and all our guests. I'll be back with the afternoon edition at 4:30.